they discover a miraculous door that few would anticipate. That door doesn't lie in power, money, or fame, but deep within an ancient wisdom, a knowledge that for thousands of years has helped people could face, where every decision and every choice leads to outcomes no one could predict. You will meet ordinary people, a businessman who loses everything in a single day, a young woman confronting the death of a loved one, a loyal friend betrayed, an artist's soul drowning in despair, and witness how they face challenges for which no one has prepared them. They seem to crumble, as if there is no path forward, yet in those moments of despair, they discover an invisible strength. It does not come from outside but from within themselves, a power the Dharma calls inner peace, a path to rise even when everything has fallen apart. You may wonder, is it only the special ones who can find this path? Or perhaps it has always existed within you, even if you have never noticed? The stories you are about to hear will not only make you hold your breath with every step of the characters, but also make you reflect on your own life. There are moments when a single small decision, a simple realization, can change the entire course of a person's life. And sometimes, the deepest lessons come from the most unexpected places, a casual word, a gentle glance. And you will realize that every step on this journey is not only for the characters, but also part of your own journey. A journey that, if you dare to follow to the end, will reveal what most people spend their entire lives seeking: true peace, rising above loss, injury, and fear. In the next few minutes, you will be guided through experiences full of tension, moments of ultimate despair, and tranquil instants where inner strength ignites. Each story is a mirror, reflecting pain and failure, but also revealing how to turn them into extraordinary power. If you think you already know, within yourself. Story 1. When Suffering Knocks, Lessons from Failure and Loss. Chapter 1. Rainy Days in the City That Never Sleeps. Michael sat by the living room window, staring at the dim golden lights reflecting on the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan. The sound of cars and footsteps was constant, but inside him, there was only silence. The finance job he had devoted 10 years to had. Eyes glistening, unsure of what to say. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael just shook his head, unable to respond, as if any words were redundant amidst the swelling pain in his heart. They had argued many times about work, about his late nights, about unmet expectations. Now, his failure had become an invisible distance, a glass wall separating two hearts in shock. The next morning, Michael walked into their apartment with no interest in the usual things. The walls, filled with books, the small paintings he and Laura had hung in their first year together, now felt like distant memories he could not connect to. He opened his laptop. An email from his former company appeared on the screen. One cold line: "We appreciate your contributions, but the company will continue without you." Michael closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. Inside him, a mix of shock, despair, and simmering anger took hold. How did everything fall apart so fast? He murmured. Life had always been busy, but losing his career made Michael feel like the world had collapsed. Calls from friends and former colleagues now felt distant. "Michael, are you okay? Want to grab a coffee?" a former colleague texted. Michael stared at the message, emptiness filling him, then switched off his phone. He didn't want to meet anyone, didn't want to hear any words of comfort. The magnitude of loss trapped him in a space filled only with loneliness and disappointment. Laura sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You know, some things are beyond our control, but we still have each other. We'll get through this, together." Michael looked at her, eyes red, but words would not come. Helplessness weighed on him. He wandered outside, walking aimlessly along New York's crowded streets. In his hand, the wet umbrella mirrored the dampness of his heart. Everything seemed meaningless, as if only darkness remained. One day, while sitting in a cafe near the park, Michael overheard a conversation between two people about a Buddhist meditation retreat at a center nearby. They say that by just sitting, breathing, and observing your thoughts, you can find peace even when everything around you is chaotic. Michael paused, listening intently. The simple words felt like a small light in the darkness, illuminating a corner of his soul. He wondered if there really was a way to face this pain without being consumed by it. In the following days, Michael began researching the meditation retreat. Each evening, he read lines, stories about people like Bodhi in the past, who had learned to accept impermanence and turn suffering into lessons. A strange feeling grew within him, a mix of fear and curiosity. He feared he would not have the patience, yet he was curious whether he could find even a small peace amid the chaos. One morning, Michael decided to visit the meditation center. As he entered the quiet room, soft lights streaming through the windows, he felt a strange energy. The air was still, filled only with the gentle sound of others breathing. He sat down, closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, did not think about work or failure. He focused only on each breath. A thought flickered in his mind. I am still here. I can start over. Opening his eyes, Michael looked around the room. A middle-aged man beside him smiled softly and said, "No need to rush. Just realize that everything changes, and you are still here." The words echoed in his mind like the toll of a bell, awakening a part of his soul long clouded by failure and fear. He stepped out of the center. The rain still fell, the streets still bustled. But this time, his steps felt lighter. And in his heart, a strange feeling began to grow, a small belief that even if the world outside changed, he could still find peace within himself. Chapter 2. When Everything Falls Apart, Who Remains Within Us? Michael returned home after a morning at the meditation center, but each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last. Inside him, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for some kind of answer, but only the ticking clock replied, reminding him that time never stops moving. A few days later, when he tried to meditate, doing everything right, but the pain is still here, he muttered inwardly. The more he tried to push it away, the stronger it became. Then one rainy afternoon, Michael met the meditation teacher. The man was simple, wearing brown robes, silver hair, and eyes that seemed to understand the passing of seasons. The center was quiet. Michael approached him as if guided by something unseen. "Sit here," the teacher said gently. Between them, only the sound of rain and their breath. After a long pause, Michael broke the silence. "Master, I've tried. I've come here to find peace. But the pain won't leave me. I've lost my job, my sense of worth. It feels like I'm falling endlessly." The teacher didn't answer right away. Then, softly, he said, "Do you know that suffering often, always obvious, it hides in the thoughts that say, 'This is mine, I must be this.' When you let external things define who you are, you'll hurt whenever they change." Michael felt a pang in his. Those nights spent proving himself, guarding his image. "You speak of impermanence," he whispered. "But if I'm no longer my title, my achievements, then who am I?" The teacher's eyes glimmered with compassion. "There was once a farmer who lost his horse," he said. "Everyone called it misfortune. The farmer simply said, 'Maybe good, maybe bad.' Impermanence teaches us not to rush to judgment. Suffering transforms. It doesn't vanish overnight, but its meaning shifts." Michael asked quietly, "But how do I practice that? It sounds simple, but when my heart aches, I can't stop reacting." The teacher placed his hand on the table, closed his eyes for a moment, then said, "Start with your breath. Each time you notice a thought like, 'I'm ashamed,' breathe in and breathe out. See the thought without judging it. Each time you do that, you create a small space between you and the thought. In that space, you can choose how to respond." He shared another story. A man once walked through the forest and saw a rushing stream. He threw a stone into it. Ripples appeared and faded. The stone is an event. The water is your mind. Every loss, every insult, each is a stone thrown into the stream. The ripples rise, then settle. If you realize you are the water, not the stone, you'll see that all ripples eventually pass. The words sank deep. Michael began to see his pain not as a permanent part of him, but as something passing through. "But I still fear failure will come again," he said softly. The teacher replied, "Fear is a teacher too. Look at it with curiosity instead of resistance. Ask what feeds it. You'll find expectation, comparison, and endless wanting. Lighten those expectations, and fear will lighten too." Their conversation stretched until the evening sky turned gold. Before parting, the teacher offered Michael a simple practice. Each night before sleep, name 3 things that changed today and thank them for teaching you impermanence. Don't rush to find great answers. Each small awareness lays a stone on your path. Michael took the note and stepped outside. The sky above was soft, the clouds dissolving slowly. Watching them fade, he thought about everything he used to cling to. The sadness was still there, but now there was light, thin but real, like sunlight piercing through mist. He whispered to himself, in a quiet, unfamiliar voice, "I'll try. I'll give myself a chance to let go, and to see more clearly." And with that, he smiled faintly and walked on. Chapter 3. When Peace is Relearned Through Each Breath. The first morning after meeting the monk, Michael woke up with a new habit. He sat on the edge of his bed, placed his hands on his knees, and breathed slowly, just as the master had taught him. Not because he believed right away, but because he wanted to try, honestly. Inhale, observe. Exhale, release. At first, his mind was like a restless monkey, leaping from one thought to another. But every time he noticed it wandering, he simply smiled and brought his attention back to the breath. It was such a small act, yet it began to gather the scattered fragments of his mind into a quiet rhythm. He remembered the monk's words. Every space between thoughts is a patch of ground where peace can grow. Michael began to notice small changes, a sudden emotion, a painful memory, a tendency to self-blame. Instead of reacting, he practiced observing. Each night, he wrote down 3 things that had changed during the day. One evening he noted, "Yesterday I was angry about failure. Today I saw anger as a passing cloud. Then it faded." The journaling made him realize how impermanence reveals itself in every moment. Within a week, Laura began to notice subtle shifts in her husband. Not miracles, but gentleness. He no longer snapped when his phone buzzed, answered emails more calmly, and sat beside her without rushing to fix her feelings with advice. "You seem different," Laura said one evening, resting her head on his shoulder. Michael smiled without explaining. He sensed that letting go didn't mean losing. It meant living slower, with more awareness. Work hadn't returned, and uncertainty still loomed. Yet when anxiety came, he no longer attacked himself. He breathed deeply and reminded himself, "This is a state, not my essence." For the first time in months, he felt a safe distance between himself and his dark thoughts. That space didn't erase pain, but it transformed the way he faced it. One afternoon, Michael met an old colleague at a cafe. The friend looked at him curiously as Michael spoke about his meditation practice. "Strange," the friend said, "but you really seem calmer." Michael replied softly, "I'm learning to live with things I can't keep." It was a fleeting line, but it carried the weight of new understanding. Acceptance is not surrender, it's seeing reality clearly. Meditation didn't remove difficulties, but it made them visible, and therefore workable. When sadness appeared, he didn't suppress it. He allowed it to be, and looked at it with kind eyes. He realized that suffering often arises from the wish for permanence. When he loosened that grip, the pain softened. Impermanence was no longer a Buddhist concept in a book. It had become a living truth within him. One morning during meditation, Michael suddenly recalled the moment he received his termination email. The memory still stung, but instead of consuming him, it floated like a leaf across a pond, rippling, then settling. He smiled at that memory, thanking it for teaching him the fragility of everything. That small gratitude marked the first true step of healing. Day by day, he devoted more time to nurturing his relationship with Laura and others. He began to understand that inner peace isn't an empty silence, but a grounded openness, a state that allows genuine connection. When he acted with mindfulness, conversations became lighter, conflicts less explosive. He listened more, reacted less. 1 week later, the monk called. "How are you doing?" he asked. Michael answered, "I still hurt, master. But now I can feel the pain and still stand here." The monk chuckled. "Standing is the bravest thing. Keep standing." Those simple words were like a small log added to his inner fire. The story doesn't end with a miracle. There were still weak days and tearful nights. But the greatest change was that Michael no longer feared pain as an enemy. He saw it as a strict but honest teacher. That night, he sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer. Placing a hand over his heart, he took a long breath and whispered, "I'm still here." Outside, life kept moving. Inside, a fragile peace had begun to settle. He stepped onto the balcony. inhaling deeply under the night sky. He knew the journey was far from over, but now he could walk it, one mindful step at a time. And if life tested him again, he would remember the breath, remember the monk's words, and know he was never truly alone. He smiled into the darkness, sensing a quiet faith that everything changes, and so could he. Story 2. Forgiveness, the journey of healing the wound. Chapter 1. The letter never sent, and the secret buried in the heart. Isabella stepped into a small cafe on Piazza Navona just as the late afternoon sun filtered through the old sycamore trees. She carried a worn canvas bag, inside it a leather-bound notebook and a few sheets marked with ink. Since moving to Rome, her life had taken on new textures: the church bells in the morning, the violinists in the square at dusk, and long evenings with close friends. Among them was Elena, her dearest friend, the one she trusted more than anyone else. They met at the Art Academy years ago, two ambitious young women dreaming of changing the world through paintings and music. Elena was the radiant one, charming, eloquent, always the voice that lifted Isabella when she faltered. The first time Isabella thought of quitting after a failed exhibition, it was Elena who held her hand and said, "No, Isa, we'll keep going. Failure is just one page of the story." From that moment on, Isabella believed in Elena as if she were an extension of herself. Over the years, Isabella shared with Elena not just laughter, but the fragile, hidden corners of her soul, her father's absence, her mother's quiet struggles, her heartbreaks and doubts. Elena listened, held her hand, and often whispered, "It will all be okay." Those secrets became like seeds, buried and nurtured by trust. Then one day, Isabella received an invitation that could change everything. An international art exhibition that promised to launch her career beyond Italy. Overwhelmed with joy, she couldn't wait to share the news. The first person she called was Elena. They met at a small riverside restaurant, and Isabella spent hours describing the project, the concept, the scale, the vision. Elena listened, eyes bright, smiling as if it were her own success. Yet, beneath that smile, something stirred, a shadow no one could see. As the evening light dimmed, Elena leaned forward and said softly, "Isa, if this project happens, maybe I can help with the logistics, the connections, maybe the proposal." Isabella, touched by the offer, replied warmly, "Of course, Len. I'd love that." They hugged goodbye, and Isabella went home believing she was walking into the brightest chapter of her life. Weeks passed. The exhibition's press release went out, and congratulatory messages poured in. But then Isabella stumbled upon an article on an international art website. A full feature about the exhibition concept, her ideas, her artwork. Except the article credited Elena as the organizer and creative lead. Her hands trembled. The journalist quoted Elena discussing her team of young artists, including Isabella, who was briefly mentioned as a collaborator. Confused, Isabella called her friend. The phone rang endlessly until Elena finally picked up. Her voice distant. "Isa, I'm a bit busy right now. Can I call you later?" The call never came. Days went by. People began referring to the show as Elena's project. Invitations bore Elena's signature. Isabella's name faded quietly into the background. Confusion gave way to disbelief, and disbelief slowly hardened into pain. She tried to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, but every attempt to justify it only made the truth sharper. When Isabella finally asked to meet, Elena agreed. They sat in the same wine bar where they had once celebrated small victories. This time, the air between them was heavy. Elena arrived late, eyes darting, hands shaking as she gripped her glass. "Isa," she began, "I know you've seen the article." Isabella's voice was calm but cold. "Why did you do it, Elena? Why did you let my work become ours only when the spotlight turned bright?" Elena's lips quivered. "I thought it would be better this way for both of us. The industry listens to me. I wanted to help you get seen." "By taking my name off my own work?" Isabella asked. Elena looked down. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought this was the only way." That night, Isabella walked home through the narrow streets of Rome, the city lights blurring through her tears. She opened her notebook and began to write. Not a message of accusation, but a letter she never intended to send. In it, She recounted everything they had shared, the late-night talks, the laughter, the trust, the belief. When she finished, she folded the pages carefully and tucked them into a drawer. It wasn't closure, but it was truth, written in her own hand. The following days were filled with whispers. On social media, Elena posted photos of the project, captioned with vague words like, "Our vision, our journey." People began to assume they had worked side by side as equals. Some even said, maybe Isabella wasn't ready for the spotlight. Elena carried her through. Each rumor cut a little deeper, not just into Isabella's pride, but into her faith in friendship itself. Instead of confronting the noise, Isabella poured her pain into her art. She painted late into the night, canvases filled with thick, trembling brushstrokes. Crimson streaks bled across muted gray, like wounds trying to close but refusing to scar over. Each painting was a silent cry, each line a question she didn't know how to ask. When she could no longer hold it in, she called her mother back in Florence. "Mama, she betrayed me," Isabella whispered. Her mother's voice was calm, steady, the way it always had been. "Maybe she acted out of fear, Isa, but you must protect your heart. Don't let her take your light." Isabella cried silently. Her mother's words, though simple, planted a small seed of calm, a reminder that integrity, once lost, cannot be borrowed from others. Weeks passed before Elena called again. "Isa, can we meet?" Her voice wavered, barely holding together. Isabella hesitated, then answered, "Yes." They met at a quiet bar across from the opera house. The air was cool and still. Elena wore a plum-colored coat, her hair loose, her expression unreadable. When Isabella walked in, time seemed to slow. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elena said softly, "I'm sorry." "Why now?" Isabella asked, her tone steady. "I don't know," Elena said. "I thought I could handle it, but I see now what I've done." Isabella reached into her bag and placed the folded letter on the table. "I wrote this the night I found out," she said. "It's not a confrontation, just something to remember what was real." Elena looked down at the letter, her eyes glistening. The city lights outside flickered against the glass between them. When they finally stood to leave, no resolution had been spoken, no forgiveness asked outright. But there was something different, a silence that felt like space, not distance. As Isabella walked home through the quiet Roman streets, she carried no victory, no relief, only awareness that love, friendship, and pain could coexist in the same heart. She glanced at the folded letter one last time, then tucked it deeper into her bag. Somewhere inside, beneath the ache, she sensed the faint beginning of healing. Not yet forgiveness, but the courage to keep walking toward it. Chapter 2. When hatred rises and the ego is tested. In the days following her confrontation with Elena, Isabella felt like a leaf caught in a restless wind, moving, yet directionless. During the day, she wandered through galleries, talking to journalists and collectors, her smile perfectly in place, but inside her, a storm brewed. At night, when the lights went out, anger rose like a small flame that refused to die. She couldn't understand how someone she had trusted so deeply could betray that trust so easily, for recognition, for success, for something so fleeting. Hatred doesn't always come loudly. It creeps in quietly, like grass pushing through cracks in summer concrete. Harmless at first, then unstoppable. Isabella found herself comparing everything to Elena. The way she dressed, the way she spoke, how people congratulated her. Every compliment for Elena felt like a pin in her chest. "You said it was to help me," she whispered to herself in the dark. "Or was it just to help yourself?" There was no answer, only the echo of her heartbeat and memories once warm, now frayed. One sleepless night, Isabella lay listening to the rain on her roof. Fragments of the past replayed in her mind. Elena's laughter, Elena's comforting embrace when she was afraid, Elena now standing in the spotlight that used to shine on both of them. The anger turned into a fierce need to prove herself, to make Elena feel the pain she had caused. "I'll make them see," she muttered. "I'll make them know the truth." But vengeance has a cost. The thought of retaliation didn't soothe her, it made her chest heavier. One night, trembling with fury, she drafted a message to several people in the art community, exposing Elena's lies. Her finger hovered over the send button, but then she deleted it. The impulse passed, but the ache remained. Hatred demanded action, but every action born from it only. Deep in the wound. One afternoon, lost in confusion, Isabella wandered into a small second-hand bookstore. The smell of dust and old paper calmed her slightly. On a high shelf, she noticed a thin book bound in faded cloth, Teachings on Karma and Loving-Kindness. She didn't know why, but she took it down. The first page read, "Karma is action. Every thought, word, and deed plants a seed. Good actions bear good fruit, harmful actions bear pain. Yet karma is not fate. It is a web of causes and conditions that can always be transformed." Isabella read slowly. Each word seemed to pluck a hidden string within her. Karma, a concept she'd heard before but never truly grasped. She remembered times she'd blamed her mother unfairly, hid her pain behind ambition, or sought validation in clearly, and all will lighten. She closed her eyes and let the words sink in. Impermanence. The truth of everything she had built her life around. Career, friendship, reputation. If all things. Cafe nearby. Her emotions felt like bold brushstrokes. Anger, envy, grief, self-pity, painted onto an invisible canvas. But as she turned the pages again, she came across a passage on metta. Loving-kindness. One who cultivates loving-kindness does not seek revenge. Compassion is born from understanding the suffering of all beings. Isabella wondered, how could she possibly wish well for someone who had caused her so much pain? Then she remembered her mother, how her mother loved without conditions. Perhaps loving-kindness wasn't weakness after all, it was the strength to see the shared suffering beneath every cruel act. In the days that followed, Isabella began observing herself instead of obsessing over Elena. She wrote in a journal, "Today I felt anger when I saw her name. Today I wanted to say something hurtful. Today I breathed and watched the anger fade like a cloud." Writing became a mirror. It showed her how hatred owned her thoughts. The more she saw it clearly, the less power it had over her. One night, Isabella dreamed she was standing by a river, holding a heavy stone. She wanted to throw it hard into the water, to shatter the reflection of peace. But an old man sitting nearby said softly, "If you throw the stone, the ripples will wet your own feet. If you release it, the water still flows, and you'll see the world more clearly." Whether it was a dream or something else, she woke with a deep understanding. Revenge may cause waves, but those waves always return to the one who started them. Seeking solace, Isabella began attending evening chanting at a small Buddhist temple in her neighborhood. She didn't plan to chant. She just wanted to listen. The rhythmic voices and ancient Pali verses filled the air like a tide. But you can always choose what to plant next. Instead of sowing hatred, sow understanding. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. "But how do I stop hating?" she asked, "when my heart still burns?" Each morning, she whispered, "May she be at peace." At first, the words tasted like stone, cold, unnatural. But as days passed, the edges softened. She wasn't suddenly serene, but the flames inside her grew weaker. Hatred, she realized, was exhausting. It demanded constant feeding. Forgiveness, however slow, began to feel like freedom. Gradually, she also began to understand an letter to Elena, not to accuse, but to speak honestly about her pain, her disappointment, and her longing for closure. She didn't send it right away. She read it again and again, as if each reading. She didn't claim she had forgiven completely, but she understood something vital, that forgiveness isn't a single act, but a process. Not forgetting, but understanding. And for the first time in a long while, her heart felt spacious enough to listen, to question, and perhaps to begin again. Chapter 3. When Forgiveness Calls and Peace Returns. Isabella opened the door of the small cafe and there, sitting in their old corner, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea. When she saw Isabella, her shoulders trembled as though about to break, but she held herself together. Neither spoke. Elena, and spoke evenly. "I've read everything. I understand you had your reasons, but now that we're both here, say it. Whatever you need to say. Let's face it." Elena exhaled deeply, tears glistening in her eyes. "I say I was wrong. I let ambition cloud what really mattered. I thought I was helping, but I ended up hurting you. I'm sorry." Simple words, yet behind them was genuine remorse. Sometimes, an apology isn't enough. Isabella knew this. Words could be found anywhere. What she needed was to see change in action. Elena rose from her seat, her hands trembling as she reached across the table. I want to make things right. I'll publicly give you credit. Let me fix this. Isabella felt her heart quicken. Memories, good and bad, came flooding back. Yet she also understood that forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. Forgiveness meant acknowledging the wound, seeing it clearly, and choosing to live with awareness. They agreed on something simple but meaningful, to make the truth public. Elena would issue a public apology, giving Isabella full recognition for her role in the project. It wasn't just about. Isabella read through the comments, feeling a lightness rising in her chest, as if a small stone had finally been lifted away. But healing didn't end with outward actions. The deeper work remained. Within, Isabella continued her mindfulness practice, continued reading and reflecting on the Buddhist teachings she had found. Each morning she whispered the same phrase, "May all beings be at peace," not as a magical formula, but as a slow, patient stitching of her heart. She realized that forgiveness begins with understanding human frailty. Everyone fears, everyone clings. Everyone can be blinded by desire. One evening, Elena returned to visit her. She carried a folder, sketches, handwritten notes, early drafts, all with Isabella's handwriting still smudged in ink. "I kept these," Elena said softly. "They're proof of your work, your vision. I want people to know the truth." Isabella flipped through the pages, each one like a piece of the past finally acknowledged. This was no grand gesture, but it carried the weight of sincerity. At the same time, Isabella discovered a deeper lesson in impermanence. She remembered how tightly she used to cling. And within that truth, she found room to breathe again. Forgiveness, she realized, was the doorway through which both she and Elena could step into something new. Weeks later, they co-hosted a small community talk at a local art studio. The topic wasn't art alone, but the price and the peace that come with creation. Standing before the audience, Elena spoke honestly about her mistake. She didn't excuse it. She looked at the crowd and said, "I hurt the person I valued most. I can't undo that, but I can take responsibility." Some nodded, some stayed silent, but something shifted. Isabella sat in the back, no longer driven by the urge to prove herself. Truth had already done that. The Buddhist teachings say, forgiveness is not forgetting. It is seeing things as they are. Every action arises from conditions. No one is defined by a single moment. When Isabella looked at Elena, she no longer saw just betrayal. She saw a whole human being. Fear, pressure, hope. Clear. Together they set new terms for future collaborations: authorship, transparency, and consent. They had learned that trust without responsibility is fragile, and friendship should never be a "someone betrayed me, I destroy them, but you showed me another way." Isabella's eyes softened. That moment reminded her that her healing was not just personal. It had begun to ripple outward. Time passed. The wound slowly healed, not by returning to what was, but by transforming into something wiser. Isabella resumed her creative work, now grounded in clarity. She kept detailed notes, ensured fair acknowledgement, and practiced openness with every partner. She wasn't naive anymore, but she wasn't closed off either. Her heart had learned discernment. Her mindfulness practice deepened in small, quiet ways. When she brewed her morning coffee, she paid attention to the aroma. When she walked down the street, she noticed the texture of the pavement. When she met strangers, began to change. She invited Isabella to co-found a small creative space for young artists, a transparent and nurturing place where ideas could be shared without exploitation. All projects would. Impermanence and forgiveness. Impermanence is the gate to liberation. When we see that all things arise and pass, our hearts soften toward ourselves and others. Forgiveness is not erasure. A young volunteer accidentally damaged one of Isabella's favorite paintings. It wasn't destroyed, but it was scarred. Isabella's first impulse was anger, but instead of shouting, she sat down with the volunteer, listened to their trembling apology, and helped them find a way to restore the peace. That moment showed her how far she had come. Her peace wasn't built on control anymore, but on awareness. She often thought about a Buddhist phrase she once read, unshakable peace. Not the peace that ignores pain, but the kind that breathes within it. Sometimes at night, she meditated in the dark, imagining her painful memories as fallen leaves drifting down a quiet river. She watched them float away, not pushing, not holding. And in that stillness, forgotten, it means I've chosen not to let pain own me anymore. They fell silent. Some wept, some nodded. In that silence, they too felt a spark of release. The more Isabella lived this way, the more connected she felt, to herself, to life, to others. Her story became a quiet example that pain, when met with mindfulness, can transform into compassion. Students came to learn from her, grateful to walk a path that no longer demanded revenge for meaning. When she thought of Elena now, she no longer saw an enemy. She saw a person, flawed, fearful, learning, just like herself. One serene morning, as church bells rang in the distance, Isabella wrote in her journal, "Forgiveness doesn't return me to the past. It gives me strength to step into the future." She closed the book, feeling light. She walked outside with a soft smile. Peace was no longer something she sought. It was something that quietly lived in her. It revealed itself in small things, the sound of water in a bucket, the laughter of children, the aroma of coffee at dawn. The story of Isabella was never meant to be heroic, only human. The Dharma had given her tools, impermanence, karma, compassion, and mindfulness, not to erase suffering, but to carry it with grace. And when night came, she would place her hand on her heart, breathe deeply, and smile. She knew the road was long. Both admired and feared. At just 38, he had risen to become the youngest executive director in one of Tokyo's most prestigious corporations. His colleagues saw him as sharp, disciplined, and utterly confident, perhaps too confident. In every meeting, his words carried weight, his ideas shaped company strategy, and his voice often drowned out others. At home, even his wife, Aiko, felt the invisible wall between them growing taller with every promotion he earned. "You don't listen anymore, Kenji," she once said quietly over dinner, as he scrolled through his phone. He didn't even look up. "Listening," he murmured, "is for people who don't know what they want." He had built his empire on precision and control. His team admired his brilliance, but feared his. Entered the room. He mistook their silence for respect, not realizing it was the silence of withdrawal. "They just can't keep up," he told himself. "I'm surrounded by amateurs." But late at night, when his reflection stared back at him from the glass walls of his office, there was a flicker of unease, a hollow feeling he couldn't name. Then came the project that would define his career, or destroy it. A massive deal with an international client depended on teamwork, trust, and clear communication. But Kenji, unwilling to share credit, began taking over everything. He micromanaged, overrode decisions, and dismissed suggestions with a single glare. "We do it my way," he insisted. When the deal collapsed due to miscommunication and internal conflict, Kenji's fury erupted. He said finally, his voice calm but firm, "You've lost more than a deal today, Kenji. You've lost your team." Those words echoed in Kenji's mind long after the meeting ended. He went home that, "I hope someday you'll climb down and find yourself again." He sat there for hours, the city lights flickering through the window. For the first time, there was no one left to prove anything to. No one to admire him. No one to fear him. Only silence. Vast, unrelenting silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, Kenji felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not anger. Not pride. But the faint tremor of loneliness, the kind that stripped away every illusion of control. He looked at his reflection in the glass again, but this time, he didn't see the confident. The neon lights of Tokyo shimmered like restless thoughts on water, bright, fleeting, and never still. Somewhere deep within, a quiet voice began to stir, asking the question that would change everything. What if all this, success, control, reputation, isn't who I truly am? And though the night stretched endlessly, for the first time, Kenji didn't fear it. He simply sat there, facing the darkness, alone, yet closer than ever to the truth he had been avoiding all his life. Chapter 2. When Solitude Knocks and a Bell Awakens the Mind. After that sleepless night staring at the city lights reflected on the glass walls of his office, Kenji began to sense that his outer achievements could no longer fill the emptiness within. Every congratulatory message, Echo that meant nothing. Then came a small, unexpected moment that shifted everything. As he stood before the elevator and caught his reflection in the metal doors, he suddenly felt as though he were looking at a stranger. Who am I if not all these titles? The question rose quietly, making his heart beat faster. From that day, Kenji began noticing the subtle traces of isolation. Colleagues stopped inviting him to casual talks. Partners no longer entrusted him with delicate matters, and friends, polite as ever, now kept their distance. It wasn't dramatic. It was like fog, slowly seeping into his bones. No one remembered his birthday. Gatherings were canceled. Even messages of congratulations arrived as rushed texts. Loneliness didn't strike like thunder. It settled. Softly, persistently. Each morning he woke up with a heaviness he couldn't name, and each night he lay awake wondering, what's the point if there's no one to share it with? One rainy afternoon, with nowhere to go and no one to meet, Kenji wandered down a narrow alley and stumbled upon an old temple hidden within Tokyo's concrete maze. He wasn't a religious man, but something in him, a quiet, unspoken ache, wanted to see something that couldn't be measured in performance reviews or metrics. The temple gate was low, its wood damp with rain, incense hanging faintly in the air. In the courtyard, an elderly monk sat cross-legged, eyes half closed, body still as if time itself had forgotten him. Kenji hesitated but did not turn away. The monk motioned for him to sit. Slightly. Perhaps, he said, you have forgotten that you are part of many things, not a separate whole. The sentence was simple, but it stirred something deep inside. The monk began with questions instead of answers. When you say I, what do you mean? Kenji listed the usual things: his name, his position, his family, his past, his values. The monk nodded. All those are conditions, he said. They arise and fade. That is impermanence. When you cling to a fixed image of yourself, you suffer when that image changes. The word impermanence, a concept he'd heard before, but never truly grasped, now began to take shape within him. The monk continued. A person is born through causes and conditions, parents, circumstances, education. What you call self is merely a collection of conditions. Understand that, and you'll see you are not a solid thing that needs constant protection. Kenji frowned slightly. But if there's no fixed self, how do I take responsibility? How can effort exist without someone behind it? The monk smiled. Responsibility does not depend on a rigid identity. Your actions still bear consequences. Seeing through the illusion of a fixed self doesn't free you from accountability. It frees you from acting out of fear or pride. You act not to defend your image, but out of understanding and compassion. The words pierced through the armor of logic Kenji had worn for years. For so long, he had believed that control and prestige defined worth. Now he began to glimpse a different truth. That worth could exist quietly, even without applause. The monk guided him into a short mindfulness practice. Notice your breath, he said. Notice your thoughts as they come. Do not chase them. When an emotion rises, see it as a cloud passing across the sky. As Kenji practiced, he felt, for the first time, a small space between the thought, I must prove myself, and the one observing it. Inside, your memories, job, family, fears, and joys are all temporary guests. If you cling to one object and say, I am this table, you'll suffer when it breaks. But if you remember you are the back in slow motion, not with guilt, but with understanding. Then the monk gave him a practice. Each day, note 3 things that have changed within you, and 3 that have faded away. Don't judge, just notice. You'll see impermanence as a friend, not a thief. Kenji nodded. The exercise seemed simple but strangely daunting. Yet in that moment, something in him cracked open, not breaking down, but breaking free. He asked, if there's no permanent self, why does pain still hurt? The monk replied, because we haven't yet learned to see pain as a passing visitor. Awakening doesn't mean numbing emotions. It means not being swallowed by them. When pain comes, see it, trace its roots, and you'll find freedom not from pain, but within it. The monk told him a parable. A potter once crafted a beautiful vase. He called it mine and loved it dearly. One day, it fell and shattered. He wept. Later, he realized his suffering came not from the vase itself, but from the thought mine. When he saw that the vase was merely clay, fire, and craftsmanship, all impermanent, he continued making pottery, but with peace in his heart. Kenji smiled faintly. The image of the broken vase mirrored his own life, his shattered relationships, his lost titles. As the meeting drew to a close, the monk placed a gentle hand on Kenji's shoulder. "You may still pursue your career," he said, "but remember, your job is a role, not your identity. When you see the self as dependent on conditions, you can work with love rather than ego. And when failure comes, you won't collapse." Kenji's eyes glistened. There was no sudden enlightenment, no miracle, only a quiet certainty that something real had begun to shift. He stepped out of the temple into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped. The streets shimmered with reflected lights. The city hadn't changed, but he had. In his hand was the piece of paper the monk had given him, and in his chest was a question that now felt like a companion rather than a wound. Who am I, really? Before leaving, Kenji turned back and said softly, "I've always feared losing what I built. I want to stand firm, but without becoming hard." The monk smiled. "You will. By letting go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means acting with a heart that knows everything is changing." Kenji nodded, bowed slightly, and walked into the night. The city's noise returned, but within him, a silence remained. And from that silence, he heard the faint echo of a temple bell. Lingered. Sharp words still escaped him at times. Yet, something new had quietly sprouted within, a sincere wish to live differently, not merely to achieve, but to be with more gentleness. Interrupt. Instead, he took a slow breath and asked, "Could you tell me more about this step? Is there something holding you back?" His tone was calm, almost curious. The man, instead of shrinking under pressure, began to open up about the real difficulties his team faced. That moment, so small, yet profound, unlocked conversation instead of shutting it down. One young employee looked at Kenji and smiled faintly. It was a look of acknowledgement, of witnessing change. Kenji began setting gentle rules for himself. Each morning, he sat in silence for 10 minutes, focusing on his breath, listing 3 things he was grateful for and 3 ways he could grow that day. Listen more. Praise someone for their effort. Refrain from raising my voice in front of the team. These small intentions slowly became habits, and habits, over time, wove into a new way of being. Repetition became transformation. At home, he reached out to Aiko with quiet consistency. He joined family dinners without his phone, asked about her day, and spent weekends walking with her instead of answering emails. One evening, Aiko looked at him and asked softly, "Are you really?" Work remained his biggest test. Following the monk's guidance on impermanence, Kenji invited Yamamoto into his office. No harsh voice, no cold demeanor, only honesty. "Yamamoto-san, I was too harsh. I'm sorry for hurting you." Yamamoto looked startled, his eyes grew moist. No one in their company had ever heard such words from a superior. They spoke openly about expectations, transparency, and rebuilding trust. It did not erase the past, but it opened a new way forward, respect and effectiveness coexisting. He began practicing active listening with his younger staff. Instead of critiquing reports immediately, he asked about creative challenges, about what went wrong and how it felt. Surprisingly, people began sharing more ideas. A design team once paralyzed by fear started to flourish. Numbers stabilized, even improved, proof that compassion and performance were not opposites. A tense moment came when a major client complained about delays. Old Kenji would have yelled, threatened, and demanded. This time, he asked, "What's the real bottleneck here? How can I help remove it?" The team explained the lack of resources and unclear communication. Kenji redistributed manpower, clarified protocols, and worked directly with the client to rebuild confidence. Within weeks, the project was back on track. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about control, it was about presence. He also learned to set boundaries. At night, he put his laptop away. On weekends, he allowed himself to rest without guilt. When an urgent issue arose, one Sunday, his pulse quickened, but instead of reacting, he breathed, returned the call the next morning, and calmly resolved it. Efficiency, he realized, came from stillness, not frenzy. Outside of work, Kenji joined a small mindfulness group at a temple. Each week, they meditated, read short sutras, and shared reflections. Listening to others speak about their own fears and failures, Kenji saw something universal. Suffering is shared. He wasn't unique in his loneliness. The difference was only in how each person faced it. One evening, as he spoke about his struggles with leadership, a colleague said, "We all thought you were strong, but maybe you were just lonely." The words stung, yet soothed. To be seen was to be healed, even a little. A small but touching moment came when he remembered a young employee's birthday, Emmy, whose special day he had once ignored. This time, he sent her a sincere note and invited her for lunch. "You remembered," she said. Surprised, Kenji smiled. "I remembered we're working together today." The simplicity of that gesture thawed the ice that had long built between management and staff. Not everyone believed in his change. Some called it fake, a PR stunt, or a moment of weakness. Kenji didn't argue. He knew trust takes time. His old mentor, Mr. Tanaka, observed quietly for months before approaching him. "You're not perfect, Kenji, but you've learned to reflect." That's rare. Those words, spoken without flattery, marked a quiet milestone. Kenji's approach to failure changed as well. When a marketing campaign flopped, he didn't look for someone to blame. Instead, he led a review session with openness. "Let's see what we can learn from this, not who's at fault." The atmosphere shifted. People stopped hiding mistakes and began sharing insights. Creativity returned. Progress replaced fear. Spiritually, Kenji kept practicing what the monk had taught him, recording impermanence. Each night, he wrote down 3 things that had changed: a conversation, a decision, an emotion. Writing reminded him, everything moves, nothing stays. One night, thinking of Yamamoto, bowing his head, he wrote, "I hurt someone. I take responsibility." Facing it on paper helped him face it in life. One afternoon, Kenji held a small feedback session. "I know my past behavior hurt many of you," he said honestly. "I want to listen. What needs to change so we can move forward together?" The room softened. A senior employee spoke gently. "We need direction, yes. But we also need respect." Kenji nodded, adjusting work policies to encourage transparency and mutual care. Change was not without relapse. Once, exhausted, he snapped at a staff member over a. His colleagues relaxed around him. Clients trusted him again. Business metrics didn't drop. They rose. Proof that humanity and success could coexist. One weekend evening, Kenji and Aiko cooked together. Nothing fancy, just vegetables, quiet laughter, a feeling of ease. "You seem lighter," she said softly. He placed a hand over his heart, remembering the monk's words. "When you stop identifying with the role, you can love without condition." Love hadn't vanished. It had evolved, grounded in presence. At night, he often sat on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. Over time, he understood a truth whispered by the Dharma. Impermanence is not the enemy, it's the teacher. Attachment brings suffering. Letting go brings space to love and to live. Control faded. In its place appeared an open courtyard, where others could enter freely. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees outside his office, Kenji smiled. He touched his small, leather notebook, filled with quiet commitments, and felt peace rising from within. Life was far from perfect, but he was walking steadily now, with feet grounded and a heart soft enough to feel, bright enough to choose. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of coming home. Story 4. Patience and Perseverance Through the Storms of Life. Chapter 1. The Wind Through the Bamboo. The days Arjun could hardly breathe. Arjun woke up each morning with a weight pressing against his chest, as if a small stone was lodged across his heart. The alarm clock rang to mark a new day, yet his mind echoed the same question over and over. What am I supposed to do? With damp hair and a wrinkled uniform shirt, Arjun stepped out of the small apartment his mother rented near campus. The narrow alley opened into the main street, where motorbikes and bicycles crowded together in a noisy stream of motion. At 20, Arjun already knew the face of failure, not for the first time. But each failure hit him like a wave that pushed him backward, leaving him drenched and trembling on the cold sand of self-doubt. At the art university, Arjun had once been a promising student. His professor wrote, "Lacks refinement. No distinct style." Those words didn't just critique his work, They carved into him a sense that he might never be good enough. At home, the air was just as suffocating. His mother, Asha, worked long hours at a general store and came home late, her hands smelling of detergent and metal. She looked at her son with worry, the kind of worry that came from wanting to protect but not being able to change anything. Eat something first, then focus on your project, she said softly, trying to ease the tension. Arjun nodded, but inside, his thoughts were spiraling. If I keep failing like this, what will Mom think? Am I just a burden? Their dinners grew quieter each night. The only sound was the faint clinking of spoons against bowls. Occasionally, he wanted to push forward, to draw again, but every time he picked up a pencil, his hand trembled, and the image of that red grade hovered before his eyes like a silent accusation. At school, things weren't better. Group discussions became battlefields of subtle judgment, where every idea was measured and dissected. Arjun felt himself pushed to the edges. His suggestions were brushed, slicing through his fragile sense of individuality. One afternoon, during a group meeting, frustration took over. Arjun slammed his sketch onto the table. This is how I see it. The team leader stared for a moment before saying, "Good idea, Arjun, but it's too messy. We need something the sponsors will approve." The words hit like a slap. Arjun's face flushed, but he stayed silent. Inside, he wanted to scream that creativity couldn't be confined to what sells. Instead, he quietly picked up his sketch, walked out into the rain, and stood under a tin awning, fists clenched. As the sky poured down, the monsoon rain came suddenly, heavy and relentless. Arjun watched the street turn into rivers of silver, his reflection flickering in the puddles. A friend from class, Mira, ran up, tossing her raincoat over his shoulders. "Hey, what's with that look? Rough day?" Arjun just shook his head. Mira, gentle as always, sat beside him, holding his hand. "Don't let a few opinions make you doubt yourself. They just see things differently. I know your heart's in your work." Her words wrapped around him like a fragile thread, tender, yet too thin too. Another door slamming shut. His academic failures rippled outward, canceled projects, withdrawn sponsorships, and, worst of all, the erosion of self-respect. At home, financial pressure added another layer of weight. His mother's back had begun to stoop, and Arjun knew he should help. But when he applied for a part-time job, the store manager looked him up and down. "You're still in school? Then why aren't you doing well there?" The question jabbed at his hidden wound. "I'll find something that fits," Arjun murmured. Two worlds, school and home, pulled him in opposite directions, and he didn't know how to balance either. One night, desperate for air, Arjun went to a small park where a giant banyan tree spread its roots like a web. He sat under it, listening to the hum of crickets and distant frogs. "Why has everything become so hard?" he whispered to himself. He remembered his mother's stories from childhood, tales of patient farmers who waited for the harvest with faith. As a boy, Arjun had believed that time healed all things. But now he knew, time didn't heal anything on its own. Without effort, time simply watched you sink. Inside, a war raged. Part of him wanted to keep fighting. Another part wanted to give up entirely. Should I persevere or let go? The question looped endlessly, a ring of fire in his mind. Had traveled the world and now lived quietly in a small mountain town. Arjun sat at the back of the hall, not expecting much. The artist spoke of failure as an essential brushstroke in the canvas of creation. He told a story about weavers waiting patiently for the right season to gather silk. "Perseverance," he said, "is not clinging to a fixed image. It's learning from failure." The artist smiled, his eyes gentle. "Failure is a cunning teacher," he said. "It can destroy you if you don't listen, or transform you if you do. Know the difference between effort and exhaustion. Stay awake within your heart. Don't let pride drive you." Arjun carried those words like a small lantern. Not bright enough to light the road, but enough to take one step at a time. Over the following weeks, he tried to apply them. Instead of rushing headlong, he slowed down, reviewed his mistakes, learned new techniques, and practiced patiently. He volunteered as a teaching assistant for a children's art class. It paid nothing, but it reconnected him with something pure, the joy of creation itself. The kids looked up at him with innocent curiosity. One little girl. The change, small, steady. Arjun no longer quit halfway. He began revisiting old assignments with calm attention. Sometimes, he stayed up late sketching, not out of desperation, but focus. One night, Asha found him still working by the dim lamp. "You're persevering, aren't you?" she asked softly. Arjun nodded, his eyes warm. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I always knew you could." Yet the path remained rocky. Some days, Arjun still felt haunted by doubt. Some critiques still stung. But one evening, standing by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the rain, he sensed something new, a quiet acceptance. Not resignation, but peace. He whispered to himself, "I won't quit because I'm afraid of failing. I'll keep going, but with wisdom." That night, beneath a thin veil of moonlight, Arjun opened his old sketchbook and wrote a single line. "Today, I endured, I learned, I moved forward." The words felt like a promise. He set the pen down, knowing murmur. Somewhere within that sound, Arjun felt the storm begin to pass. Chapter 2. When every door closed, and a teacher opened a narrow path. Arjun did not stop. After a string of failures, instead of giving up, he told himself he had to try every possible way to prove his worth. He enrolled in extra classes, attended workshops, researched online, and stayed up late drawing. Refined every detail, and sent them with great hope. When the results arrived, his name was not on the list. The first time, he blamed bad luck. The second, he began to doubt his talent. The third, doubt turned into a silent scream inside. "Maybe I'm not meant for this," he thought, walking home in the rain. It wasn't just the competitions. A community art project Arjun had poured his heart into was canceled when a sponsor backed out. The small exhibition he and his classmates had been preparing suddenly lost its venue. His team scattered. Some took jobs, others lost interest. Authenticity were like two rivers within him, technique and emotion, and when one dried, the whole stream faltered. The disappointment extended beyond school. One evening, after working as two voices wrestled, duty and passion. Days passed, and with each failure, the temptation to give up grew stronger. He thought of getting a stable job, abandoning his dream of art. The thought was comforting but hollow. Every time he imagined himself without art, his heart shrank. He knew that giving up would bring safety, but also a void no money could fill. One afternoon, caught in the rain, thoughts, without wanting to sound desperate, he murmured, "Teacher, I keep trying, but nothing works. It feels like I'm hitting a wall." The monk looked at him for a moment before speaking gently. "Sit for a while. Tell me how you've been trying." Arjun described everything. The late nights, the rejections, the harsh feedback, the pressure from home. His words poured out like water through cracks. When he finished, the monk smiled faintly. "You've done much, but do you see a pattern? Have you ever tried to look at failure as a teacher?" Arjun frowned. "I've tried to learn from it, but it still isn't enough." The monk tapped his knuckle lightly on the table and said, "There are two kinds of effort. One is like a hungry man chasing food, desperate to see results. The other is like a farmer planting seeds, watering and tending without demanding the harvest. You've been like the hungry man, rushing to see. When you don't, you suffer. Try the farmer's way." The words landed like a pebble in water, rippling slowly through Arjun's mind. "But what if I keep tending and nothing grows?" he asked. "Then I'll waste time. My mother will struggle, and chances will pass me by." The monk closed his eyes and told a story. A farmer once planted seeds in dry soil. The first year, nothing grew, nor the second, but he still watered and warmed the earth. In the third year, sprouts appeared, and he harvested more than he imagined. The farmer didn't know what changed, only that patience itself was the true nourishment. Then the monk shared simple yet profound teachings of the Buddha. Patience isn't blind endurance. True patience is the wisdom of seeing where suffering begins. Perseverance is action guided by understanding. When you see that all things are impermanent, you stop clinging to results. You still act, but without letting success or failure define your heart. Arjun listened, and something stirred. Impermanence, a word he had heard before, now sounded weighty, real. Success and failure were just passing clouds. The monk gave him a simple but challenging practice. Each day, do 3 things. 1. Complete a small task toward your goal. 2. Note one thing you could improve. 3. Do something kind for someone without expecting anything back. The first builds skill. The The second builds awareness. The third builds compassion. Arjun nodded, eyes brightening. Awareness shows me where I lack. Compassion keeps my heart alive. Over the next days, Arjun practiced faithfully. Practice more. These simple acts became his quiet meditation. Small, consistent, mindful. Once, when faced with harsh criticism again, Arjun didn't react angrily. Instead, he calmly asked, "Can you show me exactly which part feels off to you?" The question shifted the tone from confrontation to conversation. The critic, surprised, ended up offering detailed advice, and even invited. When success came, he smiled. When it didn't, he stayed grounded. One evening, after another rejection, Arjun sat by the river and watched the ripples. "I did my best today," he whispered. "Tomorrow, I'll do my best again." The words carried no despair, only quiet strength. Months passed, and things began to shift. His skills improved. His thinking grew clearer. Most importantly, his heart softened. His mother noticed it too. Her son smiled more, worried less. He met new friends, fellow artists who valued practice over fame, and together they supported each other through the struggles. One day, an event organizer called, inviting submissions for a small local art exhibition. Arjun sent one of his works, this time not as a desperate plea for recognition, but as an offering of effort. The piece was accepted. When his painting was hung on the wall, Arjun stood before it silently. The joy he felt wasn't about pride or victory. It was the peace of knowing he had walked each step with patience and mindfulness. Before leaving the monastery one last time, Arjun bowed deeply to the monk. The monk smiled. "You've done well, but don't think you've." But the quiet understanding of a long path ahead. Arjun's story at this stage was not one of dramatic triumphs. It was made of mornings of discipline, silent hours of effort, and quiet returns after storms of life. Chapter 3. When the light returns after the storm. That rainy season passed, leaving not only damp memories, but also traces of transformation in Arjun's heart. He was no longer the impulsive, impatient young man who used to give up at the first sign of hardship. There was now a calmness in his eyes, a kind of peace born not from luck, but from falling and rising again, from learning to endure instead of escape. One morning, as the sun climbed over the rooftops, Arjun rode his bicycle to the university feeling unusually light. He no longer feared lectures, nor cared about judgmental stares. At his desk, he no longer drew to prove his worth. He simply drew, as naturally as breathing. His lines became softer, freer, unburdened by expectation or fear. And in that freedom, his art began to come alive. One day, the head professor of the art department walked by and paused before Arjun's new painting. He stood in silence for a while, compassionate and resilient. The recommendation came from that same professor who had seen Arjun's growth. Arjun hesitated. Teaching had never been part of his plan. But then he remembered the words of the monk from the small temple. "Plant your seeds where you stand. Don't worry about where they'll grow, only that you nurture them with a kind heart." So he said yes. The classroom was a simple village room with peeling walls and bright eyes staring curiously at him. The children were restless, giggling, and distracted. At first, Arjun grew frustrated. But then he saw himself in them. The same impatience, the same desire for quick success. He took a deep breath and softened his tone, guiding them gently, teaching them not just how to hold a brush, but how to see, to look at a flower, not only with their eyes, but with their hearts. Day by day, the children's drawings grew more vivid. Some drew homes, others rivers, and one painted his mother's face with a radiant smile. That it was true, he hadn't smiled like that in a long time. A smile free of anxiety, untouched by failure. From then on, Arjun's life began to blossom naturally. His paintings and the children's artwork were displayed in a small village exhibition. A local newspaper wrote an article about him titled, "The Young Artist Teaching Children to Paint Their Dreams." When he read it, he didn't feel pride, only gratitude. What moved him most was not recognition, but the sparkling joy in the children's eyes. Some weeks later, he received a letter from an old classmate, one who had mocked him years ago. The letter read, "I saw the article about you. Maybe I was wrong. You didn't give up, you just chose another path to success." Arjun felt no anger, no triumph, only peace. I used to think perseverance meant never stopping. But now I know it means knowing when to pause, to breathe, to reflect, to remember why we began. Life rarely goes as we wish. But if we walk with patience and a heart free of resentment, every road leads to peace. For a moment, the hall was silent, then erupted into long applause. Arjun bowed slightly, feeling something close and open within him at the same time. A quiet warmth filled his chest, gratitude, release, and a deep knowing that he had weathered the storm without losing himself. That night, the laughter of the children, they all felt like pieces of one great painting. The painting called Impermanence. No sorrow lasts forever. No joy stays unchanging. Everything comes and goes, like clouds drifting across a mountain peak. He whispered to himself, "Thank you, life, for teaching me patience. Thank you, hardship, for making me stronger. Thank you, failure, for showing me what truly matters." The moonlight fell across his face, calm and luminous. In the stillness of the night, Arjun understood, healing is not a single moment. It is a journey, renewed in each breath, each act of kindness, each smile shared. The next morning, he returned to the village. The children ran toward him, laughing. A little girl tugged at his sleeve and showed him. Had walked through a long rainstorm, only to find his own rainbow shining quietly within his soul. Story 5. The Lesson of Loss, When Miracles Come from Letting Go. Chapter 1. When a Father's Eyes Still Shine in the Morning Light. Mornings in the suburbs of Portland always carried the scent of coffee and pine. In a small house on Maple Street, sunlight filtered through the window, touching the face of a man seated at his wooden workbench. John Harper, his hair peppered with gray and his hands tanned from years of labor, carefully smoothed the surface of a new plank. Emily, his daughter, leaned against the doorway, watching him with admiration and affection. "You do everything so precisely," she said, her voice bright. He looked up and smiled gently. "I work carefully, so you won't have to fix it later. What if I want to do it with you? Then I'll sit and watch. But remember, sand along the grain. Otherwise, the wood will scar." A simple sentence. But Emily never forgot it. That was how her father taught her everything. Gently, but with meaning. From the kitchen, Helen, her mother, called out, "Are you two turning the workshop into a battlefield again?" They both burst out laughing. The sound filled the morning air with warmth and lightness. Emily grew up surrounded by such sounds, the steady rhythm of hammering, the whisper of wind through the small garden, and her father's soft humming of old tunes. Every evening, they sat together at the dinner table, listening to her brother Mark's stories from school and her mother's quiet reminders about the little things that made up their days. Life moved simply and peacefully, like a wordless melody. One crisp autumn morning, Emily waved goodbye as her father put on his brown jacket and grabbed his tool bag. "Where's today's job site, Dad?" "Up north. Should be done by late afternoon." "It's cold today? Drive slowly, okay?" "I will, sweetheart." He smiled, patted her shoulder, and stepped out the door. Emily stood there, watching until his car disappeared behind the trees. She didn't know it would be the last time she saw him. That afternoon, while she was at work, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was trembling, broken by static. She only caught fragments. "Accident. Highway 12. John Harper. In critical condition." Her hands went cold. The phone nearly slipped from her grasp. Without thinking, she ran out of the building. The hospital corridor was cold and sterile, the white walls glowing faintly under. "Everything we could." Emily didn't hear the rest. The world turned silent. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she rushed into the room. Her father lay still on the bed, face peaceful, almost smiling. No breath, no warmth. She took his hand. It was cold and stiff, the same hand that once held hers so firmly. "Dad, please wake up. You haven't finished that table for me yet." "No." They barely spoke. Only the wind outside and the steady tick of the clock broke the stillness. The day of the funeral brought rain. A slow, unending drizzle. The oak coffin glistened as it was lowered into the ground. Emily stood still, eyes fixed, heart numb. People came to offer condolences, their voices muffled. "Time heals, dear. He lived a good life. He would want you to be strong." But there was no healing, not yet. Only an empty space inside her chest, vast and echoing. When she returned home, she opened her father's room. The smell of wood, of polish, of coffee, it was all still there. His chair bore the same familiar dent. Everything waited for him to return, except he never would. That night, she turned on the light in his workshop. The yellow glow fell across half-finished woodwork. On the work table sat a small wooden box. Inside were scraps of notes, bits of wood, and a folded piece of paper. When the wind rises in your life, remember, there's still a quiet place within it. Her tears dropped onto the page. She sat there for hours, surrounded by memories. The morning they fixed the shelf together, the afternoon he taught her how to measure wood, the laughter when he mixed up the names of nails. Each memory rose and broke like waves. In the following days, sleep eluded her. Every sound reminded her of him, the rustling of leaves, the creak of the floorboards, even her own breathing. Anger began to creep in. Anger at fate, at the world, even at herself. Why did he have to leave that day? She whispered in the dark. Why didn't I stop him? Just one more minute. No one answered. One morning, she found her mother sitting in the kitchen, eyes red and swollen. You didn't sleep either, Mom? No. I dreamed I heard him hammering again. They both fell silent. Her mother poured tea, her hands trembling. I miss him so much, Emily said softly. He misses you too, her mother replied. The sun still rose, but Emily felt separated from it all. Every time she saw a father holding his child's hand on the street, she had to look away. Even the most ordinary scenes became unbearable. Reminders. One afternoon, Emily returned to the workshop. The door creaked open, letting the wind in. Dust shimmered in the sunlight like golden threads. She sat down and picked up a piece of wood. Her father had been working on. The knife marks were still there, rough and uneven. She placed her hand over them, whispering, Dad, if you can hear me, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Outside, the sky was painted in pale orange. A sparrow landed on the window frame, chirped once, then flew away. Emily watched it, eyes glistening. She turned on her father's old radio. A cassette was still in the light. The tape clicked to a stop. Emily wept, clutching the radio to her chest as if it were him. Amid her sobs, something faint stirred within her, a flicker of warmth, small but alive. That night, she lay in bed and opened the window. The cold air carried the scent of wood and faint coffee. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky. She gazed upward, as though something beyond between darkness and light. In the days following the funeral, Emily's house was wrapped in silence. The clock on the wall still ticked steadily, but each beat seemed to whisper the same truth. Her father was gone. Everything around her remained the same. The brown leather chair where he used to read, the half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, the notebook left open. Only he had disappeared forever. She couldn't accept it. There were nights when Emily lay so still she could hear her own heartbeat, tears falling for no reason. Each morning, she went to work like a shadow of. Emily stumbled upon an article titled Meditation and Letting Go. She read it slowly, line by line, until one passage caught her breath. When we lose what we hold dear, it isn't the end. It is a reminder that all things change. Only when we accept impermanence can we truly love completely. The words glimmered faintly in the darkness of her grief. She sat in silence, then looked up the address of a meditation center on the outskirts of the city. She didn't know what she was looking for, peace, faith, or simply a place to breathe, but her hands moved on their own, registering for the weekend retreat. The road leading to the meditation center was veiled in mist. Pines stood tall on both sides, their branches whispering softly like the breath of the earth. Resonant, lingering. She didn't know why, but tears welled up, soft and cleansing, like rain washing the dust from her heart. The next morning, during the first meditation session, the master entered. An elderly man with silver hair, calm steps, and eyes bright as the open sky. He spoke little, his voice slow and low. You are here not to forget your pain, but to look directly into it. Pain is not the enemy. It is the teacher. Emily sat in the back row. Her breath trembled. Her mind kept circling the image of her father falling by the roadside that fateful afternoon. Alive, breath still came and went. Days passed. Emily meditated morning and night. She learned to walk slowly, noticing the faintest things, the rustle of leaves, the touch of wind, sunlight through her fingers. When sitting, she heard her heartbeat, sometimes mixed with quiet sobs. One evening, after meditation, the master asked the group, "When you look at a flower, what do you see?" No one answered. He smiled gently and continued, "You see color and fragrance, but look deeper. Within the flower are rain, sunlight, soil, and time. Without them," thinking of her father, she imagined him in the wind, in the soil, in the morning light, not gone, only changed. The pain remained, but its sharpness softened, becoming something almost tender. That night, she approached the master quietly. "Master," she whispered, "how do I stop hurting when I remember someone I love?" The master's eyes were kind, steady. "There is no way to stop remembering, my child. There is only a way to see the memory differently. When you understand that your loved one has never truly been lost, only transformed, then the memory becomes gentle." Emily said nothing. She stepped outside and gazed up at the sky full of stars. Each one seemed like a memory shining softly. She clasped her hands and murmured into the breeze, "Dad." The master passed by and paused beside her. "You see, even this leaf is teaching you impermanence," he said. "When it was green, it caught the sunlight. Now fallen, it returns to the earth. People are the same. We cannot keep our forms forever, but love remains." Emily held the golden leaf in her palm, sunlight shining through its tiny veins. A smile touched her lips, the first in months that came without tears. That night, everyone gathered around a single candle in the hall. The master recited a short verse. "This body, like a bubble, appears at dawn, fades by dusk. Knowing thus, the heart grows calm. A smile of peace arises." Emily closed her eyes. In her breath, she saw her father smiling back, not in pain, not far away, but close, serene, and light. Whether it was imagination or truth, she didn't care. Her heart felt weightless, like a leaf released into the wind. At dawn, when she left the temple, she turned back to look at the building nestled among the pines. The morning bell rang, deep, warm, and full of quiet joy. Emily whispered, "Thank you, Master. Thank you, Dad. I understand now." She walked down the narrow road, returned to the city with a lighter bag, and something far heavier, the lessons and experiences that had soaked into her breath. The days of meditation at the monastery hadn't erased her memories, and for the first time she felt a quiet urge to finish something, rather than just run away. When she opened the workshop door, sunlight poured through the window, gilding the wood shavings like much. Silence had become a form of sharing. Emily began spending her mornings finishing the table her father had left undone. Each drill, each stroke, each screw became an act of meditation. Her father used to say, "Working with your hands is how you understand life." The saying sounded simple, but now it carried the quiet gravity of truth. Each movement became a practice, to be holy, in the present moment, not letting the past cast its long shadow over what she was doing. Outside of her work, she reread her meditation notes and Buddhist scriptures her teacher had given her. Through her body and breath. When sadness rose, she inhaled and recognized it, exhaled and let it pass, not suppressing, not chasing. It wasn't easy, but slowly she began to see that pain still existed, yet it was no longer the whole of her being. One afternoon, while repairing her father's old armchair, she met Mrs. Liu, their longtime neighbor. The old woman sat down, eyes damp but meditation retreat, not preaching, just sharing. She spoke about breathing when the waves of grief came, about letting memories drift by like clouds. Mrs. Liu held her hand and whispered, "Maybe I should try that. I'm old now, but I'd still like to know peace." Emily smiled, realizing that something inside her had begun to bloom, a wish to share, not to teach. From that spark, Emily started hosting small gatherings at the workshop. She invited relatives, neighbors, and friends to sit together, tell stories, recite a few verses, and share moments of silence. It began with just a few, then grew. They didn't come for doctrine, but for space, a safe place to speak of things unspeakable. Emily was merely the host, yet each gathering became a circle of healing. Elders shared their losses, young ones their worries, and everyone practiced a few minutes of mindful breathing. In one session, a middle-aged man with red eyes asked, "How can you sit so calmly before your father's photo without breaking down?" Emily thought for a moment, then said softly, "I don't try to stop my tears. I let them come and go like clouds. But I also look to the other." Shaky but honest handwriting became invisible threads connecting hearts. People read aloud, shared tears, and found comfort in each other's presence. It was, in its own way, a silent sutra of compassion and acceptance. Gradually, Emily rejoined life. She took on projects again, but differently now. Work was not just labor, it was meditation. She taught local youth simple carpentry, weaving lessons on awareness and gratitude between instructions. "When you make a table," she said, "remember, it was once a tree, once soil, once sunlight. Treat it with respect." Her students listened, seeing not just a teacher, but someone whose pain had ripened into understanding. One morning, Emily received an email from a woman in another city. She had heard Emily's story shared online. Strangers led a few minutes of mindful breathing, read a short verse, and shared her journey. "I lost my father. I grieved. I went to the monastery. I learned to breathe. And now I want to share." It came like rain, soft, patient, nourishing. Sometimes she still woke up at night, heart clenched, stepping outside to gaze at the sky. She still had fragile days. But now, she knew how to hold herself in those moments. Sit down, breathe, name the sadness, and whisper, "I'm sad." No denial, no resistance. That awareness itself became her peace. During one youth session, Emily read aloud from a sutra her teacher had once given her. "All phenomena are impermanent. Birth and death are their nature." She explained simply, "Everything comes and goes, friendship, possessions, health, even life." When we understand that, we love more deeply because every moment is precious. Not because it lasts forever, but because it doesn't. A young man asked, "But if everything is impermanent, why stay attached at all?" Emily smiled, "Because impermanence teaches us to care fully, without clinging until it hurts." On the anniversary of her father's death, Emily organized a gathering at the workshop. She invited everyone to share stories of John, not in mourning, but in gratitude. Together, they built a memorial chair, each person hammering one nail, sanding one edge. When it was done, she placed it in the memory nook. It stood there, not as a symbol of loss, but of transformation. Grief had become creation, and creation had become community. Years later, Emily was no longer the woman crushed by sorrow. She still missed her father, but the ache had softened into tenderness. Her days had meaning, working, teaching, guiding, listening. She wrote short reflections and sometimes read them aloud to visitors. Her story wasn't a message demanding others to change. It was an open door. People could walk through when they were ready, or simply rest outside knowing a space awaited. One afternoon, as sunlight bathed a newly finished wooden chair, a young man entered, tears brimming. "My father just passed away," he said, trembling. "I don't know where to start." Emily looked at him and saw her younger self. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Start small," she said. "Sit. Breathe. Name your sorrow. Then do one small thing with love, tidy his belongings, make something in his memory. When done with heart, it will lighten you." The young man nodded, a faint spark glimmering in his eyes. Life didn't become perfect for Emily. Wasn't despair, but a gentle reminder that every breath, every smile, every act of love is fleeting and therefore sacred. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Emily stood before the memory nook, resting her hand on the memorial chair. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Dad, I've kept living, and I'll keep helping others live with meaning." The wind brushed by. When we understand suffering, we begin to live peacefully. Life never runs short of moments that bring us to our knees. Loss, betrayal, loneliness, illness, or those nameless wounds that hide deep inside. Yet if we look closely, we'll see that within every sorrow lies the seed of understanding and compassion. Each story in this journey, whether about loss, letting go, or faith, shares one gentle truth. Suffering is not the enemy. It is the greatest teacher. The Buddha once said, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness itself is the path." When we dare to stop running, to breathe with our pain, to simply accept that things are as they are, our hearts begin to soften. Like a wound gently bathed in sunlight, Healing happens naturally, not by force, but by patience. Buddhist stories do not ask us to escape reality. They help us to see it more clearly. Sometimes, when we change the way we look at things, the world inside us also changes. Those who once hurt us may simply be souls struggling with their own suffering. Those we once resented, they, too, are beings lost in life's storms. And when we open our hearts to forgiveness, we are not freeing them, we are freeing ourselves. So try, just once, forgive someone in your heart. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. When you let go of resentment, you can finally hear the gentle sound of your own breath. When you can smile at your past, you open the door to a new tomorrow. Forgiveness does not erase the memory. It simply takes away its power to wound you. If you are lost amid hardship, remember this. No one can walk the path for you, but you are never alone. Light exists, even in the darkest night. One mindful breath, one kind thought, one small act of compassion, that is already transformation. Thank you for walking with me through these humble stories. If, at this moment, you feel even a little lighter, a bit calmer, or perhaps a quiet smile has appeared, then that is the greatest gift. And if you wish to continue this journey, to explore more Buddhist stories, more reflections on mindfulness, more ways to find serenity in everyday life, please leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Every small action helps spread kindness and plant seeds of peace in others' hearts. Perhaps, from just one click to share, someone out there, hurting as you once did, will find their first glimpse of light. And perhaps, right now, you too have begun your own journey of healing. They discover a miraculous door that few would anticipate. That door doesn't